Welcome back, climbers. I'm your co-host, Kaylee Floyd, and this is another episode of Climbing Mount CMMC. Do you want a perfect score on your CMMC Level 2 assessment? Today, Bobby and Adam are going to share their real-life examples of what it took for them to be ready for their Level 2 assessment. And we hope you guys enjoy today's episode.
Okay, everybody, we're super excited to talk about a topic that I think a lot of people underestimate when they say, yeah, I think I'm ready. As we were going through this, right, Adam, as we were going through to get ready for our organization to be assessed, what we ran into is some things that we just didn't quite expect. And so we thought that we would just try to open up and try to be as transparent as we can and show some examples with everybody to help them kind of know how to know for fact that you're ready. How's that sound?
Yeah, sounds great. Because over the last couple weeks, months, etc., we've been hard at work through our CMMC practices and getting the finishing touches on our programs here. And one of our final pieces was our internal self-assessment. Because we look at when it comes time to be assessed, obviously a assessment is not cheap. It is quite time consuming. And for organizations, whether it be MSPs or just your average, small business out there that's trying to be assessed, that's a lot of money. You want to make sure you're prepared for it. So you're not just, the auditor doesn't show up, look at your paperwork and go, yep, this is garbage. Y'all failed. We didn't want to be in that situation. So we needed to self-assess.
Well, and I don't know about you, but I can just talk about me. I felt a little cocky. I was like, oh yeah, we've got all these things broken out, each, assessment objective with the determination statements and how we're going to address each of these respective assessment objectives. And we have it broken out in our SSP. And even in the SSP, we have a lot of times where we're citing policies and you're like, man, we're good. Mm-hmm. But when we went through to do our real final readiness, we learned some lessons.
I think a good statement to kind of pick up where you're leaving off there. We had great plans. We have great procedures, great policies. We're very confident in those. I'm looking over some of those and going, man, did I really write this? This is good stuff. But no plan survives.
Notice it was that you wrote it, because if I wrote it, that's the reason why I did design and you did documentation.
That's why we threw yours out when we started.
You're not wrong. You're not wrong.
Oh, that's a fun story for another time. Maybe that'll be like the B-roll, like recapping our journeys episode.
That will be a good story. I'm sure people want to hear how we basically took everything that I wrote and threw it out after you started.
I still love how my one of my interview qualifications was, here's a whole bunch of stuff, rewrite it and make it better.
Yes.
So, but yeah, fun stories for another day. But as they say though, no plan survives first contact with the enemy. So when we're sitting there, we've got our SSP statements, our policies and procedures. We're feeling great about it. And then I hand off my paperwork to Bobby and say, okay, go do it. Go get some evidence. And we're like, hold on, this doesn't work. This is crap. This needs to be better. We missed something completely here in this procedure. Right. And then we're trying to align that to our assessment objectives and going, crap, this could be better. We forgot this. This statement isn't as clear. And we learned some painful lessons.
Well, and as we're kind of putting our head to running into that, we kind of did this really cool thing where we actually, with Brian Hubbard, we went through and did a mock sort of like, we sat down with him and said, hey, look, can you maybe go through like just one or two controls just to see how it would feel if we were doing an assessment? And that also opened our eyes to some things, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Because if I'm not mistaken, we have that as a podcast episode somewhere earlier in the season, right?
Yeah, we're hoping that we're going to release it. Kaylee's trying her best to sanitize it because it's real. Okay. Like we actually went through that. And so we're trying to see if we can try to sanitize and maybe coordinate with Brian. But he's been really busy. So that's kind of where we're at on the state of that podcast.
Yeah, and that's actually a great point, because one of the controls and procedures we had to write up was, controlling sensitive information, CUI, FCI, et cetera, posted on publicly accessible systems like our podcast and social media. Right. And we have a procedure to check on that regularly to make sure we didn't accidentally spill something that we shouldn't have. And if we did, we have our procedures to deal with it. And I'm not looking forward to having to listen to that podcast later and go, oh, crap, we forgot to sanitize a screenshot. Now I need to follow this spillage procedure.
You're going to have to review it again. So, but the one of the things I think that was really interesting is the dance. Knowing that we're ready for the dance. Can you talk a little bit about that dance that I'm talking about and how important being ready for it is?
Yeah, so when we think through self-assessments, when you look at a control under CMMC and 800-171, they give these big, overarching, high-level statements that if you don't live and breathe in this world, you're like, this is easy to do. This isn't hard at all.
Right.
But you need to assess that and understand it. So fortunately for us, there is an assessor guide in the form of NIST 800-171A or the CMMC Level 2 Assessment Guide. And that starts giving us those more pointed examples. And that's where we start breaking those controls down into their individual assessment objectives.
Right.
So when we start doing that, we have to understand and look at a control, figure out how many assessment objectives there are, what evidence is expected to meet that, and then do we actually have that evidence? Like, how are we actually doing it?
Right.
Because it's one thing to say, oh yeah, of course I run my employees through security awareness training. Okay, can you prove it? Do you have a record to prove it, So that's kind of an interesting song and dance of, first off, is it in a policy somewhere? Do you have a procedure for it? Does that procedure result in evidence? And then can you talk about it in your system security plan?
Yeah, and that dance that you're sort of talking about is you've got to be able to dance it in front of an auditor, right?
Yep.
You don't want to be sitting there going, "Oh, can we? Do I have this?" You want to be each time the auditor's like, "Okay, we're doing 3-3-1 alpha. Go. Tell me where you're at here." And you go through and you do this and you talk about, here's our SSP. Hey, here's these things. And you want to be ready to do the dance for all 320 assessment objectives. Now, if you did a really bang up job and you wrote a really good system plan, you gave your auditor in phase one a lot of great information, there's a possibility a chunk of the controls may have already been met before you go into your phase two, which that'll be a whole other pro tip conversation we'll have later. But there's going to be a certain amount of controls that on your phase two that they're going to want to see. And they're pretty much, no matter how much evidence you want to provide them in advance, they're always going to want to see, right?
Yeah, I think when we were going through that exercise ourselves not too terribly long ago, we were talking about, hey, we went ahead and we've already captured a whole bunch of evidence for you. Well, our assessor brought up a point where that's great that you had that configuration and that was true at one point in time, but we don't know they don't know as an assessor, was that one point in time an hour before they jumped on the call with us? Was it last week? Was it last month? Or was it last decade?
Right.
They need to prove that is a valid real-time configuration to satisfy that assessment objective. And we can take all the great screenshots with dates and timestamps to show that it was very recent, all we want. They still have a requirement to do their duty and assess us fairly and with integrity.
And so I think that brings us down to kind of the most important, number one point is you want to make sure that you can go through the SSP, the policies and procedures that connect to that specific control, and then that you have the evidence for that control and you can prove it in some type of fashion or form, and you're ready to show that if the auditor right then says, right now, ready to go, show me.
Yep.
You've got to, that's the dance that we're sort of talking about. And that was one of the things that we got a little bit gobsmacked about is as we were going through to do it, we had our SSP and our policies and we felt really good, but we hadn't gone through that dance in our head across all 320 and we're ready to go so that when the auditor's looking at us, we're not kind of going, we're like, we're ready to go. You don't want to have stage fright at that moment. You really want to crush it.
Right, and there's something really, really crucial to highlight in all that is these controls are so interconnected that you don't want to make sure that you run into a failure point somewhere along that chain. A great example of that being is, if we're talking incident response, one of the methods to help coordinate incident response activities are your audit logs. Well, if one of your audit log connectors failed and isn't sending that telemetry over, you may not be able to demonstrate that evidence. So you've got to, keep an eye on all that stuff and make sure those interconnections are working as intended. Because you can start to think of these things and go, yeah, audit logs, that's just to prove who did what and when. Like, that's separate from incident response. Well, no, if I'm responding to an incident and investigating suspicious activity, I'm going to need those logs to validate and verify.
Well, and a little bit of a pro tip here is if you know that you have some evidence you're going to have to present for a specific control, if you could pick one control or one bit of evidence that shows a ton of things checked off in the process presenting that, right? That in your process of showing your evidence, you prove you have audit logs, you prove that you have all of these different types of things. That's the best kind of evidence, right? That that not only solves the specific control you have, but the auditor looks at that and goes, oh man, he just, by showing me this evidence, knocked this one off, this one off, this one off, this one off, and this one off. And that could be a huge help for them. So that's where, when you're showing that to them, sometimes you have to just be really quiet and let them take some notes and make sure they get caught back up before you move on to the next thing. And that's another kind of pro tip that could be a huge help there.
Yep, and a great simple example of that in practice. We have in our access control policies that in order to be granted access to our environment, an employee must be sufficiently trained. We have our selected training mechanisms to handle that. And as part of their access request process, it's part of my job to look through that access request and go, is this employee properly trained? Well, the AC domain comes before the AT domain. So if our assessor is just going right down the list, they go through, okay, well, how do you govern access into your environment? We go, well, we have this fancy policy and this fancy procedure that gives this final result. And here's evidence of an employee that's been onboarded into the system where, we reviewed for least privilege, we did this, that, and the other, and we also validated their training requisites as a prerequisite as defined in our process. That all of a sudden shows that assessor, they do have training built into this. They do have evidence that they've done it, and it's been reviewed, and how often it's been reviewed. That could very well allow our assessor to go through that process and go, let me check these boxes and put some notes in there real quick. Or he may just simply or he or she may simply down the road just say, when they get to the AT domain, let's look a little bit closer at those records. The key important part, the records are already there.
Right. And that really can help make your assessment go much smoother, much faster, is if you're showing really good quality evidence that encompasses multiple different controls and families. And it can really help check this off, because a lot of times assessors will do bundling. In your CCA training, they talk about doing bundling of controls that work in tandem. So when they go through and ask you specific questions, a lot of times they're looking at some underpinnings of other things that they can check off at the same time to try to be efficient. Because think about it, the assessor is trying to make money. Their job isn't just to provide some Red Cross service to you. Like, they're an organization that has to make money, and they've got to operate efficiently. And they don't want to sit here and spend countless hours doing, the battleship method of, B1, and just like, they want to be really efficient and go through and tackle as many things with, one shot, if at all possible. So helping them out would really make them happy, because you're helping make their job easier, and they do appreciate that.
Yep. And ultimately, from my perspective as the person who's getting asked a lot of these questions, the faster I can get this assessor to move on to the next point, the faster I get my assessment over with. And I can go back to doing my job. So
all right, so let's pivot here, Adam. So one of the things that we wanted to show everybody in this podcast is a template that we have. We got this from the KCD, I think. Is it that right? Or is it the KRA? I'm not sure which one this is from.
I think it's from the KCD, but it's ultimately from Curie Solutions, and it's been a huge help with us. We've done a couple small tweaks to it to make it a little bit more friendly to us, but I cannot understate or overstate how words are hard today, apparently. But their templates and documentation and just having access to their people has been a huge help for us as we've moved through this. Yeah. Especially when we started going through our evidence process saying, will this actually work? Just being able to reach out to the team over there and say, here's what we're trying to do. Here's what we're running into. Will this work? And getting told, yeah, it will. Or in some cases, absolutely not. You guys did this wrong. Do it again.
Well, it's really nice having that backstop that when you're going through collecting that evidence, you're like, is this enough? And you can kind of reach out to someone who's been through multiple JSVAs and gone through those types of assessments and work with DIBCAC. They can kind of say, we've actually seen people go through this and they've done it this way and they've tried it this way. They obviously keep everything very sanitized and generic so that, no critical or sensitive information shared, but they are able to talk in general terms to help us be more in line and be in our lane and make sure that we're going to be successful, which was a huge help.
Yep, absolutely.
So, Adam, if you would go ahead and share your screen, and what he's going to be sharing now, we try to keep this as podcast friendly. So we're going to talk more about what we're seeing, but we also are going to have this, and a lot of the media that we have do allow us to share screens. Like if you're on Spotify, for example, you can actually listen and still actually watch the video. But if you're watching on Apple, I'm not sure if we have that capability on that platform. But what we're seeing here right now is Adam is showing the self-assessment document. Can you just walk us through a little bit about this column and how you utilize this tool and how helpful it was for you?
Yeah, so fundamentally, we've got all 110 objectives and all 300 and some assessment objectives here. And this is nicely broken down by our controls. We've got our requirement IDs all the way on the far left here. So in this case, we're looking at IRL2 361, which then has a requirement text as a friendly, what are we exactly looking for here, which in this case is establish an operational incident handling capability for organizational systems that include preparation, detection, analysis, containment, recovery, and user response activities.
Mhm.
This control has multiple assessment objectives.
Right.
Fun pro tip when trying to figure out if a control has multiple assessment objectives, if you start seeing includes and then a bunch of commas, that's probably its own individual assessment objective.
Mhm.
So in this case, we have assessment objectives alpha through golf. We use the phonetic alphabet when we talk internally because, letters sound similar. So when we continue to move through, our next column is, well, what's our practice result? Is it satisfied, not satisfied, or not assessed yet?
Mhm.
We then have a nice little column here that's giving our SPRS score. In this case of 361, it is a 5-pointer, which is helpful. We then have a column with our assessment objective ID. So in the case of our main overall control, there, of course, is no assessment objective ID, but each individual statement then has its, different assessment objectives. So Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, etc.
Mhm.
Then we have our column that says our text for that assessment objective, so we can keep that extra focused. Then we have our result. Did we satisfy this control? And this is a nice little drop down. I'll go ahead for those that can see. Let them take a look there. But we have our choices of satisfied, other than satisfied, blank, so we haven't done anything yet,
Mhm.
evidence request, or not applicable.
And those are really helpful in our preparation because as we were working through collecting, we would mark it. This is, evidence needed. We need more evidence. And
Mhm.
so then because we're utilizing this template, we were able to more easily determine where we needed more focus, where we were able to spend some more time grabbing some more information, shoring up our beliefs on some things, asking some questions in areas. And it really helped me and you collaborate a lot easier to get to that 110 when we felt like we were ready.
Right, and I'll touch on this a little bit further when we get over to our findings and whatnot. But as we went through this process, when we wanted to say something was satisfied, what does satisfied mean? So we'd have our findings, basically our interview result, which really boiled down to when our assessor asks us the question, what are we saying? That'll then go over to what documents are related and what evidence do we have, which we'll talk about that in a brief moment. So those are our choices for our AO result, just to make sure we've got that handled.
Well, and I think let's double down a little bit on that because
Mhm.
I think it can't be overstated enough, right?
Mhm.
Is that satisfied means we're ready to look the auditor in the eye and we're ready to rock. Like not
Yep.
only can we validate and show the proof, we can go into the screen, we can share the screen, we can show the document. We're ready to go. It doesn't mean that we just have some information in an SSP document. It means
Right.
we are assessment ready. And I
Yep.
think that's the biggest difference that kind of smacked us a little bit in the face is like we felt like we were ready, but then we were like, oh, well, how would we exactly demonstrate that?
Yep.
Or is the evidence that we feel is really strong? And that made us start questioning, which I think is a good thing. Start questioning our stance on some stuff and really made us kind of bulk up a little bit on how we were approaching some of these controls, especially some of the assessment objectives that get a little
Mhm.
dicey sometimes.
Right, and I think to your point, something crucial to even triple down on is what evidence is expected and what are some examples that we can look to. Because there's so much different stuff there. We can tell an auditor under a different assessment objective, like, hey, we've got this great policy here that says we do this. Well, the auditor may simply go, that's great that you put words on paper. I need actual proof of this. Show me a
Right.
screenshot. Show me an artifact. And that's what we can see here in a couple of these other columns is we do call that out in our document here, where we do have what evidence is expected and what examples should we be providing. So I'm going to scroll over here and we're going to look at specifically at IRL2 361 alpha. That is an operational incident handling capability is established. Our expected evidence type is a document, and our evidence examples should include our incident response SOP and plan. So Bobby, do you want to play the role of the assessor here and ask me a question?
Sure. All right, Adam, as the assessor, I'm putting my assessor hat on here. Can you demonstrate to us your incident response plan, specifically speaking to your policies and procedures of how you address that?
Yes, so in this case, we're looking at our controls here, and our initial assessment objective is to establish an incident handling capacity. We've established that through our incident management policy and our incident response procedures. We can look at those through our incident management policy, as I mentioned, and our incident response procedures, and we're citing in our spreadsheet here which specific documents I'm calling out in my SSP statement, and that I'm specifically calling out to our assessor.
Now, a pro tip here, one of the things that can be helpful is if you can give a specific location. So like if you gave them an evidence package or they had access to some type of read-only folder, giving them a general idea of where to look. So when they're wanting to validate that on their own, because remember, phase one, they're going to collect that evidence and get it, look at it, make sure that it's a go, no go, and check that. But as they go into phase two, in between phase one and phase two, most assessors are going to want to look at as much information as they can. And if they can check it off by looking at what you have here, that's awesome for them and for you.
Yep. And as one final little note on this one here, because we have in our policy, our overall incident management policy says that our organization will prepare for incidents, run through the process. And we've had this up and running for a while, and we've practiced our incident response procedures. We were able to cite a specific incident that we had in our environment. It was a test incident, nothing malicious, nothing bad happened. Just want to be completely clear on that one. We did not have an incident, but we did have a fantastic test case that showed that not only did our policy work, we established our incident handling capacity, but our technicians, when they got that example, were able to follow our procedure as well. So we're able to say, not only do we have this documented, which is what you're looking for, but we can prove people followed it.
Well, and even on top of that, which is kind of cool, you can, in that process, what it's able to do is it's going, oh, look, our audit logs are grabbing information. And then, our Sentinel implementation is triggering and firing an alert. And so now you're checking data connectors. All of this stuff is just showing a working system that's making this beautiful picture that when you can point that out to your auditor as you show them that ticket and you went through the process and explain it, not only you're telling the story of how you actually meet that objective, but you're also checking off a lot of other additional ancillary controls that are connected, like you said, in that spider web, and that provides that auditor even more comfort with those other assessment objectives that they could potentially check off during that process, which is great.
Yeah, because it's one thing, to say, we've done something, but it's another one to be able to demonstrate that complete holistic picture in a way that's friendly for an assessor, to where they can look at it and go, okay, I'm going to actually look at that ticket that you called out. Let's take a look at that. And they can see notes in that ticket saying, here's how we detected it. Here's our analysis steps. Here's our containment. And they're looking at that going, cool, whoever followed this clearly knew to put that information in there. Why did they know to do this? Oh, well, they've been trained on an incident response procedure that says you have to include this in your work notes.
And this document provides an outstanding cheat sheet to get ready as a team, whoever is going to be on this assessment process, to make sure everybody's on the same page, that who's responsible for which, who's going to talk about which columns. And then when the assessor goes to talk to you, everybody knows what they're supposed to do. Because there's that old adage in attorneys have, you never put a witness on the stand that you don't already know what they're going to say and how they're going to say it, right? You don't want to start going down this process and just wing it. You want to know what you're going to say, how you're going to say it, how you're going to prove it for all 320. And this provides a wonderful cheat sheet so that everybody can be on the same page to do it.
Yep. So I'm going to just scroll down real quick, and we're going to look at another real simple control that has far less assessment objectives that we can look at here. And, of course, there are several of them, but we're going to simply look at, now we're going to move down to IRL2 363, test the organizational incident response capability. Single assessment objective, the incident response capability has been tested. In our instance, we said that we satisfied that because we did do a test. We review this every year to make sure that our control and procedures for testing this remain relevant. We do our incident response tests far more often as required by our policy. The person responsible for overseeing that, hi, it's the person talking right now, it's me. And the evidence that was requested in this instance, proof of an incident response tabletop, scheduled or unscheduled, or a penetration test. They want to see a screen share or artifacts of such. In our instance, a screen share. So, Bobby, you want to ask me how we do this?
Yeah. So for IR36, well, you missed. I missed the objective. You slid it over. I didn't get to. I was trying to be really fancy and actually use the real term. You
You don't
got
have
me
these
there.
memorized yet?
No,
Come on. Come on, man.
did.
Come on.
I did have a lot of them memorized from when I was getting ready for my CCP, but it has left me, 52 plus years of age. My brain is not quite as sharp. So for IRL23.6.8 alpha, can you please speak to us about how you did your incident response tabletop? And can you provide some examples and show us proof that you have done those?
Yep. So our IT staff performs tests and drills for incident response activities quarterly. These are triggered by our cybersecurity maintenance checklist, and our results are recorded in our incident database. The procedure for our incident response testing is contained in our cybersecurity maintenance checklist. I, as the compliance officer, will choose scenarios based on the risks facing the organization and weighted towards incident types or new systems the team has little experience with. And our incident management policy requires these drills at least every 6 months.
Now,
We're trying to overachieve a little bit here. We want to get them done quarterly, but we have to do it at least every 6 months.
I want to pause what Adam did. I don't know if any of you are noticing what he's doing here, but what he has done is he's taken, we haven't really talked about this, but some of you may have picked up on this, is we took the individual AOs, the assessment objectives, and we took them out of the SSP that we have written, and we condensed them into the findings section so that he's able to read it when the auditor quizzes him. The reason why we want to do that is we want consistency and validation of what is written in the SSP. So if he can get away with it, he's going to speak to exactly what is written in the SSP, because if he wrote the SSP correctly, that should be enough in general for what needs to be shared and said. Would you agree with that?
Yep, absolutely. My ultimate goal when doing all this is I want my assessor to look at what I wrote in the SSP when they ask how I satisfied a given control. And I read off some long-winded statement of, oh yeah, I do this and that and the other. And our assessor should go, cool, sounds great. Can you speak specifically to this assessment objective? And the way we broke this down, I can highlight any given assessment objective based on which one it is, Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, etc. And I can focus in on that and basically regurgitate the same statement to them.
Now, and they may ask you, right, Adam, hey, where is this exactly in your policy? And we have notes about subsections and other things. A lot of times what I'll try to do is have it in the wings to show if they go to ask it. So as he's kind of doing the talking and puppeteering, I'm getting some of the documents and pieces open in the background. I can show that, he can talk through it, or he may even have them open, ready to go. And we go through that. And then, there may be some more discussions to happen, but it's moving. Things are flowing and the auditor likes it because we're ready to go.
Yep. And so the final point of our little mock assessment on this control here is now our auditor says, great, sounds awesome, perfect. That's exactly what I wanted to hear. But show me some evidence that you actually did this.
Right.
Now, in this case, we'll want to pull up our incident database, pull up our example of our latest tabletop. Be like, hey, look, per our cybersecurity maintenance checklist, our tabletop exercise fired off as planned. We got together. Here was the scenario that we discussed. Here was what the team did. And here was our findings and lessons learned. Because that's a key item that's important in this specific control is what did we learn from it? And Bobby, a fun fact for you is if you actually look through our latest risk assessment, one of our lessons learned is on our risk assessment to remediate. So that way we can show that continuous improvement. Because again, a tabletop, especially as we're highlighting here, we're looking for novel attacks facing the organization, attacks against systems that the team has little experience with, or scenarios that may actually occur that we have to deal with. So simple ones that I would think through for any organization. Business email compromise, which, interestingly enough, was our scenario. We went a little off the rails with it, and we had some fun with it.
I made it hard. So you guys know when I played the aggressor. So we said that Bobby was on vacation, so they couldn't talk to me, and so I created some complexity there. And then I was the aggressor, and then Adam was trying to work through. So we actually went through some scenarios. We really threw a lot. I threw a lot at the team, and they did a great job.
Yeah, we took a very simple scenario that if your average organization were to run across should be a walk in the park to nail. And then we threw every curveball in the book into the scenario. We gummed up the gears. We made a royal mess of it to see just what the team would do.
Right.
And the team, true to their nature and everything like that, they did an awesome job. They did everything incredibly well. We identified some key lessons so we can be better next time. And that's what we want to do, because we want to get that understanding. But, this podcast episode isn't about instant response tabletops. Maybe that'll be a good one for another day.
Well, at the time of this recording, CrowdStrike is very fresh on both of our minds, right? That would be an example of, it doesn't matter if you got everything right. Situations can happen that are just plain wrong, that are out of your control, and you're going to have to go ahead and implement your incident response, even if it isn't a breach. Those incident, the disaster and incident type plans that you're going to have to kick in to be able to do that, you have to have them trained. You have to have your team ready to rock, because if those types of things that happen, the worst case scenario, things that are out of your control, you can be doing everything right and stuff happen that isn't even your fault, but you still have to eat it. You still have to address it. You still got to address, work through it. And I felt so bad for those people that had to go through CrowdStrike.
You bring up a good point, is because we got to keep in mind, security is, more than just, having good products in place and having some nice procedures. Security is about, the preservation of confidentiality, integrity, and availability of information, assets, etc. at its fundamental core. We're reducing it down to its simplest. So a CrowdStrike, the CrowdStrike issue, security could be classified as a security incident. You had a denial of availability of some core assets in your organizations. So you could tabletop that as a scenario.
Yeah, you have to do restoration. Teams have to go out to address those, or however you want to do it. I mean, a lot of that is very, very much in line with what you would consider an incident.
I saw a tweet from a security professional during that event that said a lot of organizations are getting a surprise exercise in ransomware recovery.
Yeah, no kidding.
Because they're having to recover systems, recover data. They didn't know what was going on, what the fix was. We were finding out in real time as info was coming out. But
so, feel for you if you had to go through CrowdStrike. That, oof, man. Thoughts and prayers. But so I think one of the things too that's really important here is that I just maybe want to put a bow on this last piece is that evidence gathering part. What it forced us to do, right, Adam, is it made sure that we had evidence for every one of them. And there were some that we thought that we were sort of ready, but as we went through, we were like, ooh, we might need to shore this procedure up a little bit. And you know what? This was supposed to fire off and scheduled and run at this time so that we would have the evidence when we needed it, and it didn't. And so we need to go through and make an adjustment. And where did we sort of so going through this really helps build that engine that starts running on its own, right? That's what you want to have. You want to have the engine that CMMC engine that's just chugging along. Everything's happening what's supposed to. The evidence gathering on its own. Other people are operating like they want to, and that makes that process that much easier for you, because you want to ultimately get in the groove of running your business the way it needs to be run. And in that process, you are maintaining the system, and it's creating the evidence so that the next time when you go to get audited, you're ready.
Yep. So when we go to do this, because we require by policy that we perform assessments regularly amongst ourselves. That's where that frequency of control reviews start to come in. So we need to start looking at this, because, we need to make sure we maintain our compliance posture. The DoD does expect that companies will evolve, they will change,
right.
we will grow, we will adapt and evolve. So we have to make sure that our systems remain in compliance. And we certainly don't want to wait until our next, a CMMC audit to come through for a third party to come in that we've paid a lot of money for,
right,
to come in and do this exercise for us. We want to be doing this on a regular cadence.
Yep.
So we want to make this quick and easy and straightforward.
So for us in this situation, we're doing it to be ready for our audit, right? But then after we get our level 2, that next year, we have to go through, or some process needs to go through to review this every year until the next assessment, which will be in 3 years. And you just so every year you have to go through this. So this is that what we're showing everybody is a good way to try to check that box, so that each year you're checking and building that evidence. So in the third year, and your auditor shows back up, you're like, each year we did this self-assessment and validated where we're at. And they're like, whew, man, that's great. You guys are killing it. And your third, your next renewal of your CMMC should just go like clockwork.
Yep. Anything else we want to mention on the spreadsheet before I kill our screen and we can keep talking?
No, I think you did a great job of presenting it. So thank you, Adam, for being the Vanna White on the board there.
I'd like to buy a vowel. There's no vowels in CMMC. I'd like one.
No. Yeah.
Makes for funner acronyms.
Yes. Well, I hope this was helpful to everybody to kind of see. And this is just one way this is the way that we approached it. Is it the only way? No. There's lots of different ways to slice that bread.
Right. I've to that point, I've built out in previous job roles, previous lives and everything, my own flavor of this, doing it a different way. Just once we started working with Curie provided a lot of stuff, and I said, yeah, this is better than what I did. I'm going to just forget mine existed.
Let's go this way.
This is cute. But there's several different ways to slice the bread here. The key important things, whether you're buying a template from somebody, whether you're building one yourself, or you just found one off the internet and you think this looks great. This should align, or actually not should, it must align to your assessor guides. If it is not built off 800-171A, you've got a problem. If it's not built off the CMMC Level 2 assessment guide, you've got a problem, because you just don't want to go off, off the hip remarks of what's required and everything. Otherwise, you're going to be in a world of hurt. You want to make sure you're getting the official stuff from the right people so that you're assessing in line with what your assessors will expect.
Right.
And you want to make sure you're being incredibly honest with yourself here, because your assessor's there to find the cracks in things.
Right.
And, there's a running joke in the CMMC community of all the organizations that self-attested their perfect 110 SPRS score. And if all those organizations had actually done it right, well, we probably wouldn't be in this boat right now. But of course, everyone said our security is great. We've got a perfect score. And the DoD audited and said, no, you don't. And China and our foreign adversaries are over there going, look at the cool state secrets we just got for free.
Yeah, right.
So
I think there's a lot riding on this, and making sure that we follow at least some type of good process of reviewing yourself, whether it's a third party. I mean, obviously that would be great, but that's cost involved. So if you had to do it yourself, we really wanted to show you a way that you could do it yourself and do it the most accurate ways possible. And there are plenty of times, right, Adam, me and you just kind of rolled our sleeves and started looking at each other and like, I think it's this way. I think it's this way. And we kind of, we had to kind of come to terms with some things on how we were looking at it. Not everybody's going to agree, but, we both had the same mission. We worked through some challenges that we had together, and we found consensus and were able to move forward, and we both were better for it. And so I think those are the types of discussions that this kind of a document, or at least some kind of process along those lines, are going to create, which are critical to making sure that you're going to have a 110 score when it matters.
Make sure to follow us on LinkedIn and YouTube to stay up to date on the latest CMMC news. We hope you guys enjoyed today's episode and listen out for the next one. But until then, keep on climbing.